have to have some leverage of competency.
The sad part is I have no swag, dog.
Man, we got a great show for you today. We all know that the draft is coming up, and everybody has questions on who, what, when, where, why, where, and why. But ultimately, where does the draft actually start? I have the opportunity and honor to working with two fantastic reporters, minus Mike G, because Garofalo gets hurt anytime his name is not mentioned when you start talking about people. So I just want to
Mike
make
got
sure
physically hurt this week.
that
Falling
out.
down the stairs.
There we go. We need to hear the reporting there.
So,
Ego worse than anything, because it's on video.
Well, man, I'm excited. We got the draft coming up, and man, let's just talk about some of the things going on about this draft. I know a lot of people believe the quarterback situation is the talk of the town, but I, fellow wide receiver, believe that the wide receiver position is talked about even more or as good or further, just because the quarterbacks have to throw it to someone. And I think this year is pretty stacked.
Yeah, it's a deep draft, man. I'm trying to think when's the last year we had potentially 10, 12 starters you can get in the early portion of the draft, maybe even more at receiver. Was that 2020? I'm trying to think when the last elite receiver class is. This might be one that rivals that, not just in the first round picks, but the seconds and thirds as well. So it's going to be a fun one.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how many go in the first round, because like is it 5? Is it more than? I think it's more than 5. I do, because talking to enough teams over the last 2 weeks, there aren't too many teams, Steve, that believe there is a defensive player worth a top 10 pick. Now, that doesn't mean no defensive guys go in the top 10. You could see one or two possibly going. But the point is, this is an offensive draft. And then you have that group of tackles. You have the receivers at the top, those top 3. And then you can almost say Brian Thomas is kind of that 4. And then you have the back end of the draft. Most teams think, and this is where I'm curious if it gets over 5, where do corners go in that back end of the draft of round 1? That's going to determine how many receivers go in the first round by how many of these teams on the back end who have needs at maybe both of those spots. Do they go corner when they start going off the board? Maybe some teams think around 15, corners start falling a little bit, defense starts going a little bit more. And then do they go corner in the back end, or do they go receiver? I still think there's going to be more than 5 in the first round, because a lot of people I've talked to believe maybe, Steve, 14 go in the first 2 rounds. If only 5 are going in the first round or 4, what are you going to have, 10 in the second round? Like, I think you're going to have more than 5 in that first round.
Man, that's really interesting. I do believe, I don't think it's 7 that can go. But then I wouldn't be shocked, but I would be shocked. But what I really think is 6 max. I think 6 is the max with the 5 guys that are in there. The top 3 are exactly who you say you believe they are. Is it Malik? Is it Harrison? It doesn't really matter which one, because we know they're in this conversation, they're going. But that's that 80, the part that kind of makes it wonky for everyone is A.D. Mitchell. I don't think he's done anything to really help himself. I think he's dropped himself where that's where Worthy has slipped up in there at that number 5 spot. Not because he's better, it's because teams are just not okay with letting that speed go away. And that's where now the 7th guy may be, depending on which team it is that slot receiver who has the awareness and ability to play outside, which is Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, because of that speed. And traditionally, you see smaller guys playing in the slot. Those guys are 6 and above, fast enough and crafty enough that somebody will say, hey, if I'm at 33, 32, which would just where Ladd and Pearsall can go, surprisingly, because of how people look at this wide receiver.
I think 6 or 7 is a number. And I know there's a lot of people who are starting to think, hey, because of the depth of receiver class, you can wait and get another position earlier. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I also think the other side of that is, I've seen enough drafts where there's runs that happen. and you start to see receivers go off the board, you start to get scared. You're like, man, what if they run out? What if all my top 2-round guys run out? And you start to say, well, I got to go get one now. And so, like you're saying, A.D. Mitchell goes off the board earlier than you think. And then you're like, man, well, if I want Worthy, I got to get up there. If I want Ladd, I got to get up there. I know our Peter Schrager just put Polk in the back end of the first round, which I haven't seen a lot of people do that. Like, that's another name that and it only takes one team to have a certain flavor of receiver, and speed in particular is something that always rises these guys up the board. And so would it shock me if Worthy ends up being in the 20s? No, he may not be on paper a quote unquote 20s level receiver, but that speed takes you to the next loop. And so, talking to a little bit of what teams think, they think this is an offensive heavy draft. I talked to one exec who said, I would not be surprised if all 10 picks in the top 10 are offensive players. And we did not see a defensive player at all in the top 10. And so if all your offensive players rise to the top, you're going to start to figure out, do I go with the trends in the run, or do I buck the trend and say, hey, let's load up on defensive guys early? So I think I'm really intrigued.
But that's the point. But that's the point, Cam. That's the point, Cam, because and I've heard the same thing. Like I said, like there's plenty of teams that are sitting there in the top 10 that I've talked to that are like, we need defense, but I'm not going to be mad at you guys on the offensive side of the ball if you go offense, because we don't have a knockout top 10 pick on our board right now that's on the defensive side of the ball. So the point of where this number fluctuates, Steve, is if defense really the run, most teams think there might be 1-2 guys off the board on the defense side of the ball before 15. When 15 starts rolling down, teams are like, all right, we've had all these corners in for visits. I like taking them in the 20s. I wasn't going to take one of these guys here. Like, these guys start, you know what I mean? And it starts to move into that sense where these teams are now comfortable taking these defensive guys on the back end of the first round. Then that might take up a spot or two where a team has a corner and a receiver need, but they go, listen, we have the pick of the litter at corner. The top receivers are already off the board. We can get one of our top corners that are on our board. Then, because need is a bigger part of the first round than people ever want to admit. Best player available, all that bull crap. But listen,
I got this. So let's go through that. So I got the first 10 picks that you said kind of, and what their teams and needs. So you got the Bears, quarterback; Commanders, quarterback; Patriots, quarterback; Cardinals, receiver; Chargers,
O-line, receiver.
Receiver, O-line. But talking about the biggest need, right? Chargers, receiver; Giants, quarterback.
It could be receiver.
But could it be receiver if the right receiver is available, right? Titans.
But that could also be
offensive
receiver.
Tackle. Falcons. Exactly. Falcons, edge. We know they're not a receiver.
They don't need
a receiver.
No, they ain't going receiver. I'm going to tell you right now, Cam, they ain't
not
going receiver.
In the first round.
They ain't going receiver in the first round.
Not in the first round.
They ain't going receiver in the first round.
Not in the first round.
No.
Right? Over the edge. You don't go in the first round for a receiver when you need an impactful edge guy, especially with a defensive-minded guy. With your quarterback play, with your defense, with that edge rusher, that gives your quarterback you just got that you got in free agency, Kirk Cousins. That gives you now extra plays to get him going.
I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't go edge. I'll just say that.
That's what I said.
I think
if they don't go edge.
I think corner
don't go edge, I
a
wouldn't
good
be
spot
shocked
for them, especially if they trade it back.
Well, I don't think it'll be receiver.
No, it won't be receiver.
The Jets needing a tight end, right? Does that all of a sudden now with 11, 12, 13, and 14, the Vikings, one of 2 Vikings picks, the Broncos, the Las Vegas Raiders, who also need a quarterback, and the Saints, do all of these people start to get antsy because all these offensive players are coming off the board? Do they start to get antsy and say, hey, Jets, we want to move up to your spot because the guy we actually want isn't in competition with you? And so it's intriguing.
Well, the intriguing part, Steve, a lot of teams you mentioned too need tackles. And there's like a group of 5 tackles when you talk to teams, and then there's nothing. With receiver, there's these top group of receivers, and then there's like another 12. I know they're not in that top group, but there's another 12 you can get. So I would think teams would maybe panic more for a tackle than they would for one of the receivers.
But that's what I'm saying. Whether panic more means they move up in the positions that some of the other guys don't need quarterbacks either. And they're going, hey, okay. Because if we move down just a little bit, one or two of what we need will still be there versus these other people, the guys they want quarterbacks,
the wide
they won't
receiver
be.
tackle thing is really interesting to me because, like, you just talk to teams, and especially over the last 5 years, the positional value used to be very clear. You get a left tackle, that's the most valuable thing beyond a quarterback, right? But then you start to see receivers' salaries go up. You just saw Calvin Ridley get $23 million. You just saw Devontae Smith get $25 million. I talk to people in the league who say Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb all end up 30+ million when that deal's done, right? There's no other position that.
Man, I wish you were younger, Steve.
I can feel.
Don't get me started. No, actually, I'm glad I'm not, because social media and the style of play of football, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Suspended.
Yeah, there'll be more money coming out your pockets than going in.
Crack blocks coming across the side are not going to play the same way in this era, right?
Yeah, man.
But my point is, like, that position, I think, has risen in value to where, like, I think it used to be, hey, if it's equal, you take the guy who's protecting the quarterback, who's rushing the quarterback, or the quarterback. And I actually just was with Dolphins GM Chris Greer, and he had his pre-draft press conference, and I asked him the positional value question, and he said it's certainly changed because now wide receiver and defensive tackle are just as high, if not higher, than your left tackle and your edge rusher. And so because of that, does that, like, and I get the depth question. Like JP made a great point. The tackle depth is a lot less than the receiver depth. But if you're on your board, you have a Malik, or you have a Rome, or you have a Marv higher than a Joe Alt, which a lot of teams have, or a J.C. Latham, or whoever your top tackle, I think naturally you would have been, maybe 10 years ago, we take the better positional value with the tackle. But now you might just say, hey, they're close enough, I take the better player. And so that's the question the Chargers may have, the Giants may have, the Titans may have. And I think that shifts the number of receivers we have going in the top 10 and how early do they go.
I would say, Cam, though, you have to look at it that's a building by building philosophical mentality. That's not universal across the league because of a few things. One, you mentioned, like, when's the last time we had a deep receiver class? When you were saying that, I was like, I don't know, last year, the year before that. Like, every year there's a lot of receivers. That's going to continue to go by the way these kids are coming out with 7-on-7 and all these different things. They're coming out more polished. They're coming out more ready in some instances, Steve. But my point is, tackle is more limited a lot of times in the number of guys that can help your team to pick from.
I agree. I agree with that. Hold on, Cam. But I would say I think they're more polished in college. I think what we're gonna find is as more guys are starting to get drafted in the 30s, where it used to be average about 25 receivers drafted, right?
Mm-hmm.
20 receivers drafted. You're having more teams get them.
I just said keep picking them. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, they're going to keep picking them, but I think what we're going to have too is because they're becoming more polished. They're also told that you have a shot, and that shot sometimes isn't correct. And here's why. There have been, in the last 5 years, 161 wide receivers drafted. 161.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years.
Mm.
But there's been 366 signed undrafted free agents. Because they're polished in college, they're getting some bad information of come out in the draft.
Yeah.
Come out in the draft, and so you're having more 80 not last year, bro. 33 were picked in the draft. 50 were invited to the combine, participated, and fully regarded, doesn't matter. 50. 33 were drafted. 89 free agents from last year.
Yep.
So you're polished in college, but your game doesn't always completely translate and equals out to the outcome you believe because they're being overvalued a little bit.
Some of these receivers sometimes are not landing in the opportune spot
Right.
to
Or let's
breed
call it what it is,
success.
the quarterback.
Because every situation
Yeah.
isn't the same.
Yeah.
Or the quarterback. My boy
Yep.
Marvin Harrison Jr. will get to him. He should have a Kyle McCord tax, being an Ohio State Buckeye,
Yeah.
next to his
Well,
name this past
how
year.
about this? Let's talk about the quarterbacks and receivers. Let's talk about these new wide receiver
Yeah.
rooms. Man, you got Houston. They got Stephon Diggs. You got the Bears with Keenan Allen. Titans signing Calvin Ridley. The Jets, right? They got Mike Williams, who knows when he's going to be exact, and then when he comes back, how long does it take for him to really feel like Mike Williams? Because there's going to be two versions of a player, and I experienced that. There's when you get injured, you are mentally locked in your rehab. There's a point in the rehab, there's you're going to grieve. Then you start to question, and that question starts to happen because you start ramping up treatment. You get out of the boot, you get out of the stitches, you get out of that stuff, and then mobility. And then when the mobility doesn't come as fast as you would like, which is they said I could start doing mobility work on Tuesday. It's Friday. Why aren't I full?
Yeah.
Why
Right.
can't I not fully be extending, right? And then you start doing strength, and that's where you start to question yourself.
So, Steve, you're talking about time. Is time on the Jets side? No,
Okay, let's talk
not
about it.
at all. So, listen, from everything I've been asking around, he's probably not going to be ready for week 1. So
he did not get hurt.
So what is that? Yeah, exactly. So what is that leeway? What do they do with 10? They still need. I can see them going two ways. A lot of people like to put Brock Bowers there, but I don't see Brock Bowers going there just because I just think he wouldn't be used right. I don't see Nathaniel Hackett being creative enough to use him in a variety of ways like he needs to be used. But you need another pass catcher to go along with that group. A lot of people say Brock Bowers. You could go tackle at 10. They could definitely do that because their 5 is set. They made some moves, but that is a 5 that can limp quite a bit at times. It has an issue staying on the field. So you could have a tackle because protecting Aaron is just as important as giving him targets. And we know how good Garrett Wilson is. Like, we were robbed of a Garrett Wilson season this past year. As talented as he is and as good of a player as he is. But you need somebody opposite of him. Do they go tackle and then with that pick in the second, do they go receiver? Or do they try to just pull the trigger and be like, listen, we're all in it now? That's a dangerous team at 10 because I think they're like, listen, our window is right now.
Absolutely.
Pretty much this year.
And JP, because of that, it makes me wonder, are they more the aggressive team? We haven't talked about the Jets a ton in this capacity because they gave up the picks for Rodgers. But if they're all in and they say, hey, we definitely want one of the big 3, and sitting there at 10, there's a good chance one of them won't fall to us. Are they a trade-up option? Do they say, hey, let's try to get to 7 where Tennessee is or 8 where Atlanta is to at least jump Chicago and get the third of those receivers, whoever's available there? Like, they don't have a lot of draft capital, but like you said, that team might not have a lot of time to worry about what they have in 25 and 26.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned it too. They don't have it.
Yeah, so that was the Aaron Rodgers pick. And so you start going into next year's reserves or 2026 reserves. Like, if you want to ensure yourself, we get one of those premium guys, you're probably going to have to move.
Okay, so I got one for both of you guys then. So the Jets are at 10 and the Chargers are at number 5. And why you say that, because I'm looking and I'm going, okay, is Rome better positioned with the Jets, with their room, with Garrett Wilson, at some point Mike Williams, Alan Lazard, when he's available, Xavier Gibson, or the Chargers, they got some guys, but they gave away their go-to guys. They gave away, they let their two guys. Does Rome sit better with the Jets, with their established wide receiver crew, or the Chargers with Quentin Johnston, Joshua Palmer, yes, and they got another kid, I think, out of TCU last year.
Oh yeah.
That's escaping my name.
Darius
But
Davis.
again, he was a speedster. Yes, Darius Davis, a speedster. Where does Rome go? Because I'm scared if Rome goes to the Chargers and he
Yeah.
has to be the number one guy, man, that's a lot. That's a lot of baggage to carry for him because I think he's a more dominant receiver in the slot. When you have a traditional number one speed guy, he can go
Yeah.
do he can go do the dirty work in the intermediate game as the number two, but he's really your number one. You know, he just doesn't have this. He doesn't have that speed normally
Yep.
that people love, right? The
Yeah,
bottom
I
line, but
like
he's still a
Roman in
dog
New
and
York a
still
little
poor.
better because of the fit there. I think that him and Aaron Rodgers would be a big fit. And then, like you said, without the pressure of having to be the number one, you got Garrett, who's going to be that guy. Mike eventually is going to play. And I think the Chargers are a very interesting spot because we haven't talked about it a lot, but Jim Harbaugh is not this heavy pass coach coming over. He wants to run the ball. He wants to play defense. Does he even value receiver enough to want one at 5? Like, I think that's a question that's going around. Like, as good as these receivers are, and some people might say, hey, Marv, Malik, these are second and third best players in this draft overall behind Caleb, right? Does Jim Harbaugh view receiver the same way we were talking as far as positional value?
Cam's exactly right. I mean, we go rap on the door of the RV right now and ask Harbaugh, like, how do you build a team? And he'll tell you because he hasn't changed it since he started coaching. I mean, what did he do in San Francisco? It's the offensive line, it's the defensive line, and it's run the ball, protect the ball. I think he wants Justin Herbert to go out there and make a handful of plays. I don't think he wants him to be Superman throughout the course of an entire game. That's just not the way Harbaugh plays football. He has, if he stays there, and say nobody trades up to 4, Cam, like say everybody starts being realistic about J.J. McCarthy, and nobody trades up to 4 and tries to get him there, which is outrageous. But you get you get a receiver that you get your pick at tackle of the draft. Of a draft that has very good tackles.
Yeah.
So you take the one that you want. You're in a spot to start building your franchise exactly how you want to build it. And that is in the trenches, protect your quarterback, protect the football, and play really good defense. Like I said, I don't think they take a defensive player that high just because of the way guys are slotted. But you have the pick of the litter, Steve, in terms of a tackle. What do you think of what Houston has done with their receiver room? Because to me, it's like a basketball team, which some teams shoot for.
Yes.
And they got a touch of everything. What do you think of the room now?
They do. One, you got to love the room, first of all, because it's levels to this, right? And I'll break down the levels because you got Nico Collins, who's a big stretch the ball down the field guy, right? He builds up his momentum. And he's also a guy who will go up top, attack the football. Then you got Tank. Tank out there is just pocket knife. He just gonna deep cut you here and there. You don't even realize that the little nick that you're feeling, actually, he got your whole guts out right now. He just been sliced and diced it.
He owned that room, Steve,
right?
last year as a rookie.
And then Nico Brown, he's developed. It's all of a sudden he's come out of nowhere. John Mitchie the third, he really hasn't even gotten started, right? He hasn't even got started in his learning and getting familiar. And then you got the old savvy vet that you got to keep going to, Robert Wood. As soon as you count him out, he's back in there catching passes as well. And now Stephon Diggs, he's the asterisk for me and make me say because Stephon Diggs had the opportunity to do what AB did with Big Ben in Pittsburgh. And follow me. This is why Josh sometimes holds on to the football way too long and takes a beating in the pocket and scrambling around. And why Big Ben did that in his career with AB, because the routes they run aren't always necessarily driven up routes. They're kind of like, hey, get open route. And that's where the asterisk where how is the structure of now you no longer can run get open routes, Stephon Diggs. How does it impact your numbers? Like it kind of impacted at the end of the season where you have structure and you have to run a deep end, not, hey, I'm going to run a deep end, but he gave me something I wasn't ready for, so I'm gonna run a deep end and whip it back out. Right? He finagles some of his routes, and that works for them. But that isn't. I'm not sure that muscle memory is gonna be undone until maybe a little bit later into the season, because he's gonna have to get used to being back on the structure.
Dude, a couple of things real quick. Speaking of that leadership, I was like a fly on the wall, back end of the locker room in Houston. It's the game that Tank Dell breaks his leg in. And it's just me, Laramie Tunsil, CJ Stroud, and Nico Collins. That's it, in the back of this room. And Nico's getting ready to leave. And if you remember in that game, Nico goes off after Tank goes down. And CJ looks at Nico and he goes, hey, man, this is your room now. Man the F up. This is your room. I know you dominate between the white lines, but I need you to dominate during the week in the room now. That shows me two things. One, the way CJ handles the receiver group, because also he will go to wherever the defense is letting him go. He is not going to force footballs. The second part is that was Tank Dell's room as a rookie. Literally, Tank ran that room as a rookie. Like, that's pretty impressive, Steve. Like, to be that guy to come out there and just run it as a rookie.
Dogs.
So stay in that division, Steve. CJ's set up to succeed. Is Will Levis set up to succeed with his receiver group?
So you go to Tennessee. I mean, you go to the Titans. You got D-Hop, Nuke. Calvin Ridley, that's an interesting one for me. Because I know what he brings to the table in his route running, but I also know that he's going to have, especially with Snead in practice now with him, he is going to get better. Has to get better because he's going against a guy who primarily loves the press.
Oh, yeah.
So Calvin at times struggled because of his speed.
That's a good point.
Teams used to just corners would be off on him thinking, if I give him more space, that actually would help me cover this speed demon correctly. Wrong, sucker. When you got off, you gave him free access with speed, which is why Worthy is a carrot that's dangling in front of people. They're going,
what they doing, Steve? What they doing?
Pause. And so now we add it back in there. You're not getting me again, Cam. I'm not doing that.
Smart.
But getting that exercise, getting that practice, that muscle memory, because that was one of the knocks that at times he disappeared in games where you couldn't see, especially when Christian Kirk went down. When he got hurt, they were forced to put Ridley in positions that his route tree and his game didn't always mesh. It didn't always line up. And so you got him, and then you got Burch. This is a tough one because I like the kid. I like what I saw on film. I'm not necessarily sure where he was drafted was fair to him.
This in the situation that he was walking into.
Yeah, trying to replace AJ.
After they just deal.
Yeah. He didn't walk.
They just deal AJ Brown.
He didn't walk into it. They threw him in there. That's a good
point. Yeah,
he was picked. He was like, "Yay, I'll take the check."
So you think the guy in the car dropped him off in the parking lot and then just sped away and just left him in the parking lot like as fast as he could?
They didn't. No. They blindfolded him, put a hood over him, threw him in the van, and then they said, "Hey, go fix all of our problems.
Do here, figure it out."
But isn't that?
Hey,
but that's
you've been here before.
But that's wild, Steve. So think about it. Like, I want your take because it went from go be AJ Brown. What is that? The 2022 draft, and then it was like, oh, can you be a number one? That was last year, and now it's like, can you be our number three? Like, can you be our number three? That's what they need to find out this year. If he can legitimately be their number three, do you think that puts him now in maybe a different position to succeed, since that's the question, as opposed to what it was the first 2 years?
Yes, because now you have a different coordinator. You have a different head coach. So that mentality is different. Your wide receiver coach, if he changes or if he doesn't, the philosophy of the offense has changed to a good degree, right? And then by being the number three, because of the philosophy has changed, it also now has put you in a position where the number 3 should and is going to be put in a position to make the play we need, not a play, right? Instead of just saying, go make a play, it's like, hey, we're putting you in this position as our number 3. These are the routes we think you run well. These are the routes we know you need to work on, but we're not going to make you run that right now when we need you to. We're going to put you in a position to get that play, make it, bang, you made it. Go sit back on the bench, keep learning. Okay, we need you to run this route to clear for this guy, but in that you're getting data, information, and on game experience to slowly improve instead of dramatically improve as the number 1 or the go-to guy in that offense, which he wasn't ready for. And the philosophy was different because you were running the football primarily more than anything.
Yeah. All right, then spin it to this, Steve. The team that Calvin just left in Jacksonville. Are you surprised that didn't work the way we all thought it was going to work during camp? The more I spent time around him, you mentioned it, that offense, like Christian Kirk's the one who makes that group go. He makes the whole thing go. And when they lost him, it just wasn't the same. Were you surprised it didn't go the way it went, or was it maybe the time off? You know what I mean? Like just away from the game. What do you see in that group?
I thought Calvin was going to come back, and he told them he wanted to come back. I think what it all does is what happened with Christian Kirk helped Christian Kirk, but it maybe revealed some things in Calvin really that you said, okay, cool, we want him back too,
but at this,
but maybe not at
exactly.
at the price he wants and what he can get in the open market, because we see him and value him,
there's different values. Everybody just thinks we didn't value him. No, we valued him in this slot. We didn't value him in this slot. Like that's
we valued him as a 80. I haven't spoken to anybody there. Let's just say 80. And how much did he get?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
I think like 100 and something. He got 100 something, and they said, hey, we want to give you maybe 90 something, more or less more higher on the 89, 92 versus the 100 and because and here's why. Because they still have to make room for their quarterback. Their quarterback is still not under his big deal yet with the going rate. So it's a numbers game, not we don't like him.
So with them getting Gabe Davis, when he signs to Jacksonville, I got like ripped apart on Twitter, X, whatever the hell you want to call it, because I called him kind of like I was like, he's kind of a do everything receiver. If you remember, he never left the field in Buffalo. There was a reason why he never left the field at Buffalo. Because he does a touch of everything, Steve. Like he can block, he can do all sorts of things. I think that's a valuable commodity, specifically for what they do in Jacksonville.
So let me ask you this, Steve. As you try to figure out fits, because I think Buffalo has to get a receiver in the draft at some point.
It's a no-brainer with the way we're saying.
Yes, but it brings an interesting balance too, because like you said, at 28, you're sitting there. Maybe A.D. Mitchell's there, and an A.D. Mitchell could be the guy for them because he's going to play more of your outside spot, and so he will be the fit of those guys, maybe in the second tier. Brian Thomas will be a miracle. I don't think he's there at 28. You probably have to get up there and trade up if you want to do that. But for them, we've talked about waiting for some teams because of the depth. Can they afford to wait? What do you view the depth of this receiver class as far as outside receivers? As you get into the day 2, day 3 guys, is there outside receivers that you feel good about being starters, key contributors early if they decided not to take one at 28?
Well, so if they don't take one at 28, I do. There's Leggett, okay? Outside, there will be. Do I see him? I can see him second round. Coleman,
Keon Coleman,
right? I personally think Thrash would be Jamar Thrash, but I don't think that would be early for him.
James Thrash.
So I would say
Legendary
I always
Eagle.
want to
you
say
say?
James
Yeah.
Thrash. Every time I see his name, I want to say James Thrash.
Oh yeah. No relation. No relation. So Coleman, Leggett, I would say, or
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Franklin,
Potential second round guys, right?
because those are outside. Those are second round
Okay.
outside
Okay.
guys. Coleman's interesting because his physical stature is so appealing. His routes
No.
aren't
Mm-hmm.
polished, as we said they are, polished enough in the league. Now they were good enough to get him to do these
Mm-hmm.
50-50 balls in college,
Josh doesn't mind a
but he's
50-50 ball.
I was just about to say JP's point. We talked about CJ as an on-time thrower. Josh is not necessarily. He can
Josh
be,
doesn't mind
but he
throwing
does
around
not
a
need to be
50-50
on
ball.
time. And so, if you're talking about a spot where a receiver who can learn how to run routes and maybe can thrive as a jump ball specialist, a deep ball guy early, to me, Buffalo may be that spot.
it may be that spot, but the first name came to my mind when I thought about that because they're in that division. So you're telling me you want a young rookie like Coleman wanting to out jump the lockdown corner
Yeah.
Gonzo with the New England Patriots? I just don't see him out jumping him because
Yeah.
he's a pretty
Jalen Ramsey
physical
there too.
corner. Like that you see them say, yeah, Jalen Ramsey, that's not gonna equal out success. You put his confidence at risk a little bit. You set him up for failure. The same thing that we're talking about
Yep.
with Traylon Burks with
But
Tennessee. Now you put him
but
out
somebody's got to play
there
the
Right.
position.
with the
Like
expectation.
And Steve,
What'd you
somebody's
say?
got to be out there, which is why I would think Cam,
Yes.
honestly, like Brandon Beane has been aggressive at this position before in the past
yes.
in his pursuit of this wide receiver and specifically the outside. He could move up.
Yes.
If Brian
Okay.
Thomas Jr. is getting somewhere in the vicinity of them, I wouldn't be surprised if he was like, we need to go and make this move. Because they are in a wild situation right now with what we've seen them go through this offseason, with the cap situation they're in and the people that have to depart from that building. And you have Josh Allen now, and everybody says, is this window closed? He wants to be probably like, I don't want my locker room to think like we're completely resetting. Go and get
Yeah,
somebody.
that's why I think Leggett will be a good.
So that's why I
Go
asked
ahead.
that
Sorry.
question to you, Steve, and I think JP made a great point about that. Like, you start looking at the draft and you start figuring if this is something we have to do, what are our options if we don't go here? And if the answer is, hey, there's maybe two guys and we're not sure if they're that type of dude, then that puts the pressure on you that we have to get one of our guys. And that's why I think JP made an excellent point about Brandon Beane. He talked a week or two ago and everybody asked him the same question. Who's going to replace Stephon Diggs? How did you get better? And he's like, the reality is we're a worse team right now, but there's a long off season. I am making calls. I'm cooking. And remember, they got a second round pick next year out of this Diggs trade. So it won't necessarily help them this year, but they have it as ammo. And I know a lot of times you want to keep those future picks, but if there's the right guy, like you said, if Brian Thomas is there 19, 20,
It might take
21,
him a fourth, Cam. It might take a
Yeah.
fourth if he starts to get close.
Or even closer, you say, hey, let's take a pick next year and go ahead and get our guy, right? And he's our one-of-one replacement. And the other key, and you said this about Treylon Burks, you got to know if these guys have the dog in them. Because, like, the reality is, and Treylon still got a career ahead of him, I think that he was put in an unfair advantage because I talked to one head coach, and the first thing he said on draft night was Treylon Burks does not have the same mentality as A.J. Brown. For better or for worse, they're just different styles of dudes, right? And so there are players who maybe build-wise, like Treylon Burks looked size-wise like A.J. Brown, 6'2", 215-pound type dude, right? So he looks like the guy. He did not have that, at least early on, that level of physicality, that level of going across the middle and taking a shot, the quote-unquote dog that Steve had throughout his career, right? And that's something you can't teach. And so if you gotta evaluate when you're picking, does this guy have the dog for me to go up and draft him? And so for me, Brian Thomas, does he have that dog? I don't care who they draft or get as receiver. My shot is I think Kincaid becomes a top 5 tight end this year. He goes over for over 1,000
Okay.
yards. I think last year
You said
as a
this
rookie,
year?
he ended up 650, 700 yards. I think he's over 1,000 yards this year. I think he's that type of player. I think
So
yeah.
here's my question then. Hold on. Is he over 1,000 yards because
Both.
of a lot of targets, or is he over 1,000 yards because a lot of the yak after the catch? Before you answer, here's
Mm-hmm.
why I asked that. This offense is
Mm-hmm.
changing and taking the ball out of Josh Allen's hands and utilizing that running back that they've used almost 3 straight years to get a running back that can play and be the dynamic player that
Mm-hmm.
Cook is. And you can't do that if you're letting Josh Allen go back there and use his athleticism and hold on to the ball
Yeah,
and do all
I
that
think
other stuff.
Well, that's why they've wanted to go to 12, Cam, right?
Yep.
They've been dying, and John McDermott's been asking for it. Is like, we got to play 2 tight ends more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and we got to get the ball out of Josh's hands, and we can do more dynamic things out of it. And it's kind of funny. It was almost what you saw, right? You were like, they'd make the draft pick of Dalton Kincaid, and then you go, why isn't Ken Dorsey like utilizing this formation? It wasn't happening. And Sean McDermott was asking for it. And so I do think they're going to try to get the ball out of his hands a little bit more. And I think it's going to be, I know he has this massive arm, but I'm like, are these guys deep threats down the middle of the field, Steve? Like, I don't see that. I see him being dominant, Cam, in the intermediate game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like dominant in the intermediate.
And so to answer Steve's question, I think that you're going to see him elevate his yards after catch ability quite a bit. I do think that you saw glimpses of that last year, but very much the offense was still going through digs. And so a lot of times he was the second read or the third read. As we talk about the Bills as a trade-up team, I want to key in on some potential trade-up teams because we gear on the top 10 teams who are going to be in the wide receiver mix and then teams at the back end. But there's some teams in the middle, and I know you guys talked about it briefly. To me, the AFC South is so intriguing, and not necessarily the 2 teams we talked about a lot, and the Titans and the Texans. To me, the other 2 teams, because there's something that happened, and I don't take a lot of stock in pre-draft process, but there's something that happened last week that kind of made my eyebrows say, Malik Nabers.
Your eyebrows can talk.
Yeah.
Your eyebrows
can
They
talk.
do.
Okay.
They do.
I didn't know that.
A little round.
Eyebrows say.
Yeah.
Make my eyebrows say.
What's going on there? What are we doing here? So Malik Nabers, one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in this draft. Number 1, depending on who you talk to, and we're talking to Steve. And so,
we are.
Exactly.
He's my number 1.
You aren't the only one. You aren't the only one. There's some teams that have Malik Nabers as their number 1.
Hey, I'm just one of the few that are out of the closet, but at the end of the day, in those top 3 guys, man, it's a sunny afternoon. You either live in LA and going up PCH Highway, or you live in Miami, driving down there. And at the end of the day, you got a rag top and an expensive car. Which one are you gonna pick? It don't matter, Playboy. As long as my girl is with me, we doing this thing, right?
Yep.
That's what they are. They're luxury. If you get them, you're gonna be pleased. If you don't get them, you're gonna be mad. But you got to look at it. You just play better football than the teams that are up there.
Right.
Or you have
and so the reason I mentioned
Steve, I remember you being wowed when we stood next to each other at Ohio State's Pro Day last year, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was out there just working it for C.J. Stroud. Do you remember that?
I love it, and I love Marvin Harrison Jr.
My Buckeye in me got upset.
I like all 3 of these guys. When you have to. What do I like about this player over that player? For me, it's just a ranking.
Yeah.
Right? 1 or 2, 2 or 1. I have to pick. People want to know. The thing that was most impressive to me out of Nabers has to be the 4-3. You know what he brings to the table in a route running. He's also was given a lot more freedom, and freedom meaning he was asked to do some things that Brian Thomas was never asked to do. Brian Thomas was told, okay, you're going to run 4 of these 5 routes. That was their offense. Not because he's limited in that. That was his role in the offense. But his personality is also, I'm cool. He's not a good kid or a bad kid. He is why some people right now are going, what is he? Because you can't get a beat on him. He's kind of what we love out of quarterbacks. Oh, man, he's Joe Cool. He's just a kid where you ask him, hey, how you doing? He'll give you good. And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That Joe Cool
And
that worked
NFL
out for
teams-
Jalen Hurts this year. I love Jalen, but it just
Absolutely.
kind of backfire a little
Right.
bit
It's different.
back into
It's
the year.
different.
What I have heard about Nabers, to stick with him, Steve, and asking around, and the lack of explosive plays in the NFL over the past year, and the direction that it's heading because of the style of defenses that are getting played. His ability to create explosive plays, he just creates them, is what makes him appealing to those teams that have him above Marvin Harrison Jr.
And here's one of the reasons why it makes him more appealing. And it's small, but it's big when we talk about it in regards of speed. Nabers at his pro day ran a 4.3. He didn't run it at the combine. He ran it at his pro day. That counts. Whether it was hand, it 4.3, right? $100 if it's whatever, how many pennies, is still.
No, you know what they do? They make sure everybody down there, because I've been to that pro day at LSU, Steve. Everybody goes out to eat in Baton Rouge the night before. They're all bloated. They're all. It's trouble with the watch. It plays to their advantage, man.
Well, I could tell you a place for years when I was in Carolina I went to, and it never got me bloated or slow when I was up in there, which is.
But he doesn't do it.
Man,
He's all
got
good.
That
yeah,
Frey.
everybody else is. All the scouts are moving slow, and then they see him, and it's shit. He's flying.
Yeah.
Right. So he ran that 4.3. I talked to someone in the organization yesterday that literally said this question: how fast do you think Marvin Harrison really is?
That's a great question.
Now,
Go ahead.
Listen, I don't know who this person is in this organization. Does he not have access to the GPS that's available to all of these teams?
He does.
Because the 40s have been kind of like in teams' minds a little bit, because they have the GPS tracking stuff. They know how they run in game.
But I know, but when you have this number 4-2-1, they go, okay, where's everybody else?
Behind him.
Yes.
But they want to know how far. Is he a whole? How many seconds? Is it milliseconds? Is it whole seconds? When organizations or scouts can't put a number and a fact, I know for a fact this is what happened. Teams are like,
I know for sure there's teams.
And by the way, we are splitting hairs here, by the way, between these guys.
I know. Again, it just depends on which highway you want to be on, baby.
So here's what I would say. I think Marvin Harrison's going to be a star in this league. I think there's little doubt.
I believe
there.
so.
I think, but you're
Cam Wolfe breaking news.
But
Marvin Harrison, here comes, will be successful in the NFL.
Here comes the but when you start to split hairs, as we talk about. I think Steve's right, and I talk to teams who say, and it's fair or not. I think in 5 years it may change because we will see prospects do the pre-draft process, maybe more similar to Marv did. But there's a lot of we have not seen him play in 4 months. And I get what you're saying, JP, put on the tape, look up the numbers. But if you're picking a guy in the top 5, there's always it's a recency bias. I just saw Malik Nabers run a 4.35 right here. I just saw that. And so I haven't seen Marv run a route. He did not want to do that. Okay, that's good. It's his choice. But if I'm go ahead.
It was not his choice. He met with 11 teams at the combine.
Yeah.
He asked all 11, is there something you need me to do at the pro day that you need to see? Do you know what all 11 teams said?
What they
nothing
say?
We need to see from you at pro day. So
all
he
right.
said, fine,
Hey.
I won't do anything.
Hey, dog, I ain't doing it either.
Every team he
Appreciate
met at the combine, what do you need to see from me at the pro day? And they all said, we don't need to see anything. So he said, all right, fine, I won't do nothing.
I hear you.
Listen, I'm not the smartest or the sharpest tool in the shed, but I know if I can get paid to do less, guess what?
I'm with it.
Yeah.
Hey, sign me up, baby.
It is the other part about this is, and we are going through an off season, and I love that this is Steve's show essentially about this position, because there's very few spots that are going to have the luxury to do this in the NIL world, in the world that we're in now. He is preparing for the NFL. He is not preparing for a pro day. He's not preparing to run for scouts. This entire offseason for him has been preparing for his first offseason workouts. If this ends up being wildly successful, now I'm not saying all players can do this. Only a few select blue chip players at the top of the draft have the ability to have this offseason approach. But we've never seen this offseason approach before. But if this works out for Marvin Harrison Jr., that he walks into his spring workouts and they're like, man, this dude is in football shape. He is not in workout shape. That might change a little bit of this offseason in years to come with guys that are at the top of this draft.
Right. I agree, and I actually love it. Yeah. I love the idea of players using their power, especially if they feel like I've weighed the pros and cons. And for me, this is way,
and it's a small group.
That's what I'm like. Yeah, the 5th round pick is not. He gonna run everything. What you need me to run? You need me to run it twice? But for Marv.
I'll run down to 7-Eleven.
Exactly. Marv, you've seen it with Caleb to an extent too, on what he did and did not do.
The only two that really did.
And so you're right. That could create a trend at the top, and it changes how we view the combine, how we do pro days in the future. But let's not act like we don't have teams who are still very much the old approach, and they like things done a certain way. They like their numbers so that they can look at it a certain way and comp this and that. And so it takes time for change to happen. And so I'm glad Marv and Caleb are doing it. I just hope, and it won't affect Caleb, and it probably won't affect Marv at all. If anything, it's a one spot. If one team doesn't like it, the next team for sure is going to jump on him. So, but that to me is intriguing.
Where does and how does the team like the Colts, Cincinnati, Philly, Colts are 15, Philly's at 22, just signed Slim Reaper to that huge contract, but also reading AJ Brown's contract in the next year and a half has such a huge bubble, right? That it's gonna make them speed up the evaluation process. Do we extend them, or do we maybe look at possibly at 22 drafting a guy we feel is a year and a half away from becoming, right, Robin to the real Batman, which is
talk about it. I love Smitty. I love Smitty
because Devontae Smith is right. I love Smitty, but there are times Devontae had to play back because your rightful number one wide receiver is, and rightfully so, deserves to be A.J. Brown. But you got Smitty, he's a number one wide
100%.
receiver too. And his mentality is not, okay, cool, I'll play number 2. It's like, okay, I'll play number 2.
Mm-hmm.
But my game is starting to develop to the number 1, and he hasn't gotten the opportunity to kind of show that he's the number 1 guy because the play calling varies and change as the number 1 when A.J. Brown's running routes versus when Devontae Smith is running number 1 routes.
My hunch and asking around, they are with the visits that they've had and the amount of work they've done at the corner spot. I think at 22, I think they believe they can have one of their top picks at corner, which is one of their biggest needs. That doesn't oppose the number of receivers that have like second round grades that have made their way into that facility this year. But also talking to people in Philly the last week or so was like, well, I could see us getting that receiver knowing Howie Roseman in, I don't know, 9 different ways. Like Howie could get that other receiver in a variety of ways, just the way he works. That number, who would be essentially their 3rd receiver this year, could walk in the door knowing Howie Roseman 3 weeks before the start of training camp. He got C.J. Gardner-Johnson 7 days before the start of the season, and he ends up leading the NFL in interceptions. He finds guys in different ways to manage that roster, probably different than a lot of people around the league, I would say, Cam. But I could see them definitely taking receiver. I don't see them taking receiver at 22, but I do see them taking receiver for sure because of where that guy has to be right now, which would be that 3rd spot, and they do believe they can get themselves back. Defense is such a priority for them. Like we started this whole conversation, you're back into the 1st, you might have your pick of one of the top corners, and I know they've had every top corner in that building.
Well, isn't that a little bit problematic because their defensive coordinator normally doesn't play
That's a good point.
rookie
That's a good
corners. He
point.
doesn't like playing them. So
I think this is like you can have a rookie corner out there, or you can have 10 guys on the field. I think those are your two options.
Yeah.
That's
You know,
good
one of the other spots.
because that's. I hope so because I really believe that was one of the reasons why
Cam Smith in Miami.
Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick. He was like, you know what? Oh hells no! I didn't heard about this dude.
There are some guys that
Cox
play
was-
D-line that have said that exact sentence, Steve, that end up playing
Hey,
with Vic.
and Fletcher Cox said, you know what? I don't need this. I do not.
I'm about
I
to go
do not
fishing.
need this assault. You know what? You know what? I'm straight.
He's hunting, bird hunting down in
Vic,
South Jersey right now.
Hey, because Vic Fangio is a hell of a coach. He's
Yes.
also an old school coach,
But
and he doesn't believe in He doesn't believe in playing rookies, and I think that was part of the demise. And it was kind of friction in Miami because of his old philosophies with this team, and I think sometimes it limited this defense of being how
I think
good
there's
they
a
could
little
be.
bit of an X factor that maybe a lot of people don't know him. He brought in Christian Parker to run his secondary
Really good
and be the
DB coach,
passing
yep.
game coordinator. CP is one of the best young defensive minds in football right now, and Vic trusts him like crazy. Vic stole him from Green Bay when he got the head coaching job in Denver. Then Christian Parker stayed. Sean Payton kept Christian Parker, and then Vic lured him away to come to Philadelphia, and he trusts Christian a lot. I would think that might change a little bit of the philosophy. That's just a guess. A little bit of the philosophy in the secondary about the way Vic does, because he does have somebody back there running it that he trusts and thinks very highly of. So we'll see if that changes the philosophy and all.
Vic has done a lot, so he has the skins on the wall, but it's a new era of players, and I think the new era are less of, hey, this guy's done it for 40 years, and we're just going to follow him blindly, and more like, hey, explain to me why this is. I want to.
We saw that, Cam, in this most recent head coach hiring cycle.
Yes.
No lie.
Yes.
It's a different type of head coach that you're seeing getting hired.
JP handled Philly, so I'll go to the other team you mentioned there. When I started on Nabers, before we got into the Nabers-Harrison conversation, I wanted to bring up the pre-draft visits because I don't think they always have significance, but what did raise my eyebrows is Nabers went.
It made him say,
oh. That's what I said. Nabers visited pretty much every team in the top 10. He visited the Cardinals. He visited the Chargers. He visited the Giants. He visited the Titans. He visited the Jets and the Bears, right? All of those make sense. All of those could potentially draft him. There was one team he visited outside of the top 10. Just one. The Indianapolis Colts at 15. And I was like, these guys have a lot of visits. You know, I wouldn't go to a city if I didn't think they had any chance of drafting me. Like, Nabers is not going to be.
Man, Cam would be labeled a draft problem.
Yeah, label me whatever
he was
you.
refusing to take visits.
Label me whatever you need me to do. Indiana is a cool city. I'm not going to Indiana if I think there's no chance I'm going to be in Indiana. And so that was like his 6th or 7th visit.
Okay.
And it happened late. They got put on the schedule late. And so, like I said, that makes my antennas go up. And like, why would the Colts work hard? Antennas. I've gone for eyebrows to antennas.
My hat just said. My hat said.
And so,
right? So at 15. Sorry. So
he's not going to be
at
there.
15. So that means. Right. So does that mean some late conversation?
Like I said, nobody is going to say.
Some late conversations happen that saying, hey, possibly fitting may not be where we stay. That might not be our final answer. We may creep on up the draft road to where we can grab him.
And so that is what I wanted to leave for you guys to chew on, because again, nobody's going to tell you this early what they're doing. And so I can't tell you with definitive, the Colts are going to trade up into the top 5, 6, 7 and do that. Like, I don't know that. If somebody tells you that they know that, I would be skeptical at this stage. I will say a lot of times when you follow the leaves, you get to the forest, right? And so to me, you look at a team in the Colts who just watched the Texans go out there aggressively and go get a Stephon Diggs for their young quarterback. You just watched the Titans go out there and get Calvin Ridley aggressively for their young quarterback. And the Colts have a young quarterback in Anthony Richardson, who has Michael Pittman, really good receiver, not a ton else. And if they're trying to keep up in that division,
I like Alec Pierce.
I like Alec Pierce, but Alec Pierce is not at the level of these receivers we're talking about.
Alec Pierce is a down the field threat, right? Michael Pittman is a down the field threat with jump ball, right? He's gonna out muscle a guy, but separation is not where he majors. Then you have Josh Downs in the slot doing his thing, right? He's a shifty guy, short area. So what you're saying is these top guys that we're talking about, Thomas, Nabers, those two guys kind of fit that bill, and possibly A.D. Mitchell fit the build of down the field threat, vertical and horizontal. But you don't really need this horizontal because that's what Alec Pierce is for. That's what Josh Downs is for. And that's what Michael Pittman is for. So all of a sudden, you add that. And now your offense does give a little bit more, give some extra layers to compete with the people that are already.
And so I put the
let's
Colts.
let's think about this. Every Colts included, other 31 teams do their information gathering in a variety of ways, right? You get information every way possible. Could there just be, and I'm thinking outside the box, a reason you bring Malik Nabers into your building to have some time with him, spend some time with him? Could there be somebody he knows that could be available at 15 that you want some intel on? That you'd like to know about.
The other receiver, right?
I don't know. His teammate?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you could be picking Malik Nabers' brain for Brian Thomas.
Certainly.
Like you could be doing that.
That's certainly
and
the
you
case.
could be finding more intel into how you want to get a guy that's maybe more realistic for where you think you can pick. I'm not saying that's what they did. I'm just saying like that is a player that could be there for them at 15. Like for sure.
So you're saying that they utilize this conversation as an opportunity.
I mean, you kill two birds with one stone.
To say like hey, hey, we think if we can move up, because we've had some conversations to move up to possibly get them, is this a confirmation that we do or don't move up based off of this meeting? They either cross them off their list.
I don't think there's not a whole lot of meetings that happen where except medical, where guys are just eliminated. I would say it could sway you in certain directions. It's adding to the process.
I'm not saying eliminated, but I'm saying you got to move up significantly at 15. Yeah. Right? So these visits always aren't necessarily, they don't eliminate you. It just confirms your decision on moving or not. Right? And maybe they were like, we let's bring them in to see, to weigh all the options. And they go, you know what? Maybe it's worth it. Or they go, you know what? If we could, we'd love to. But what are we also going to lose to move up in some of the other needs at corner?
Corner's a big need.
At, right? Safety. So some of that stuff where they're weighing.
But it's,
can he
exactly,
Steve,
but it's malpractice, Steve, to like, if you're like, man, you're sitting there on draft day and like all of a sudden something happens, there's 2 trades, 5 quarterbacks go in the top like 12, all of a sudden Malik Nabers is getting close to you and you're like, man, I wish you would have done a little work on Malik Nabers. You don't have to move up a whole lot to get him. You don't want to be sitting there doing that.
I didn't think he had any chance of being here, right? And so, I think that's a great point.
You know what? And you know what you do?
Laramie Tunsil.
Who is that? That's unfortunately no.
I hope that doesn't happen to Malik Nabers, Cam.
That's Jalen. That's Jalen Reagor for the Philadelphia Eagles, not Justin Jefferson. Oh, Minnesota never thought that Justin Jefferson would be there in their lap.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's like, get the card. Turn the card in.
Right.
Like
and I think that's probably a lot of the situations with these top receivers, right? Teams. And the teams, like I talked to people at LSU's Pro Day who were picking in the teams who were raving about Malik Nabers, and I'm looking at him like, you guys got no chance to get him. Like it's nice to like talk about him and be like, hey, he's a really good receiver, but like, what's the Magic Johnson meme? He's not gonna be there, you know.
But here's the thing: They said, man, we using the owner's jet. We
But
out
there
here
are
staying these nice
and
hotels.
I will say this
Shoot.
too, because you do have to remember, like, this is more than just the process for this draft.
Mhm.
I mean, I love this. We're all over the place, but we're really pulling the curtain back on how this process works. Like, some teams are really big on going back to their draft work when that guy becomes a free agent. Like, the Giants spent a boatload of time with Brian Burns during the draft process. And then, oh, look, we have all this added intel when we're looking at him now to make a trade for him. So you still want to keep doing the work, and that's why these people are exhausted, because this process, you're failing every minute you can trying to do work on guys that you may not get this time around, but you want to know about them, you want to meet with them, you want to do the work. So I'm not saying, like, so you're just saying, like, well, oh, we can bank.
Yep.
Like, we can bank this for the second time around.
Absolutely.
That's another part that plays into it, which is why your scouts are sitting there, right, Cam? They're like, we're picking in the teens. We love Nabers, but I know I learned this, and this about them that I may not have known if we didn't put the work in.
And give you a great example of that. You remember Chicago used a third-round pick to get Anthony Miller, a receiver out of Memphis. It didn't work out. He gets cut. I remember reading Kyle Shanahan. They brought him in for a workout. I don't know if they signed him and how long he stayed. He was on the roster when he went to the Super Bowl. My point is, he said his statement was, hey, I remember we liked him coming out of Memphis back in college. Now, obviously, from at the third round when Chicago got him to when they worked him out, something happened, good or bad. He's no longer the third-round pick. But a few teams brought him in based on purely what his comp and his evaluation was coming out of college. Hence why some of these guys who are former first round, former second round picks, high picks, they get another opportunity. And sometimes they're on rosters for 2 or 3 years without playing because teams like them during this draft process. And that's the player they, in their mind, still believe. And eventually, after time, it shows that player is no longer there. Right? He's gotten better. He's maybe stayed the same, or he's created some bad habits for himself because of the previous teams that he was at and what his role was, and he hasn't been coached out of those bad habits or previous employment responsibilities.
Absolutely. As we kind of transition here, I think that whether it's the Colts, whether it's the Bills, whether it's somebody, I think we're going to see one team. Bengals
at 18.
Jags
Cincy at 18.
Potentially at 17. That's another team that,
for a receiver?
Yes. Keep an eye on it.
Wow.
We'll leave it at that. I think there's a lot of teams that are in the mix, and I think we see at least one of those teams trade up to get one of those big four.
So I got one for you because I've gotten hit in social media about this. People come at me at number 18 with the Bengals and T. Higgins. Man, T. Higgins wants his bag, right? And I said, hey, T. Higgins hasn't been – I worded it incorrectly, so let me reword it. T. Higgins has played, I believe, 530-something snaps. When you compare that to the rest of his counterparts, the rest of the guys that are on the field, that's only 54% of the offensive snaps. He hasn't had over 800, which is only 8 plays over, 800 offensive snaps, I think, since his rookie year. This is a guy who hasn't had a lot of snaps or hasn't continuously played enough, like Jamar Chase, like all the other people. But you've only played 54% of the offensive snaps. Not your fault because of sudden injuries. But you can't be asked, not that he's saying I'm using this as a figure of speech. You can't ask for $60 million and you haven't even been available.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Below the amount of money that you're asking for, which is top dollar. But you haven't been what's his number? I love because James.
No, you know what I'm looking up? I'm looking up the most number of snaps you had in a season. That's what I'm trying to look up.
Oh, okay.
Because it's got to be way over that. I haven't found it yet.
As James looks that up, I have a question because I think
exponentially.
I think JP made a good point with the Bengals. I'm curious: is it a receiver at 18 in place of T, or to add to that room? And it also brings me up the question: we talked about AJ Brown and when he got traded 2 years ago. could we look at a situation on a draft day situation where a team, they say, hey, Brian Thomas is there at 18. We're going to trade T. Higgins away and then take Brian Thomas and reunite the LSU guy with the LSU guy. And we're going to restart our clock there. Obviously Tennessee did that with Treylon. It didn't work out, but these are different dudes. Is that something that would be on the table? What do you view in that perspective, JP?
I just know I was told at the combine we have two options with T. Higgins. We're either going to trade him or he's going to play this 1 year on the tag and then he walks. I mean, those are the two options that Cincinnati was heading into this offseason with, and it looks like it's going to be the latter. It's going to be he's going to play this year, and they believe with him and Jamar, they try to run it back with those two together one more time for a Super Bowl run, and then they regroup. I think at 18, receiver is definitely in play for them. I know that they are very interested in defensive line, D tackle. There's not a lot of first round D tackle guys.
Byron Murphy,
but if you could get Byron Murphy, they'd probably pull the trigger there. But I mean, you're right. If Brian Thomas Jr. is sitting there and they're like, oh man, he's getting right here to 18. Maybe you have to jump the Colts, or you wait and you're going to play. There's definitely a couple of different positions they're looking at. Tackle's definitely a position they're looking at as well. But knowing their plan, receivers definitely in the plans of this draft.
Ooh.
And if the right one's there at 18, I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled it. That's part of their offense. Like, that's how they operate.
All right. Well, this really wouldn't be my own podcast if you didn't tell me, hey, what was my number now?
Okay. So here's the thing. Pro Football Reference only goes back to 2012.
Oh gosh, that's
like the back end of your career, starting the back end of your career. But look at this, we're playing 88% of the snaps, 79, 77. I think we got an injury year in Baltimore, and that was only 69% of the snaps. But I mean, like 12 is probably like, I don't know, what'd you start in 01, Steve? What year was your rookie year?
Yeah.
01?
Yeah, 01.
So I mean,
yeah.
We're already 11 years in
11 years in his career, he's still playing 75+%.
He's still playing over 900 snaps. 9-11 in 2012?
Over 900 snaps. And then you got to
That's
understand
16
a lot
games,
of
by
that
the
too. 16 games.
911 snaps, 88%.
Also, yes, you also understand that we didn't run a lot of multiple wide receiver sets where, guys are in and out, right? So it's, we also looking at it, times have changed where you're talking about 50, 60 games, like 65 plays for an offense back then was a lot of plays.
Yeah, that's what I was just
65 plays for an offense. 65 plays for an offense now, it's like, oh, you lost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You
Y'all
didn't have the
clock
football
on.
enough.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about yes. Yeah. When you're talking about an offense now, they're running at least 77 plays per game. So if we're talking look, just do quick little math, right? Quick little math.
Don't ask me to do it.
77 times how many weeks?
Now? Yeah.
17 games. That is 77 plays. That's 1,309 plays in a season.
So that means most of your top receivers who are playing 75+ snaps, percent of the snaps are playing 1,000+ snaps on a year. One thing I wanted to add, like a kind of small story from as we talk about the Bengals, and it takes me back to Malik Nabers. I got the comp, and I'm curious what you had, Steve, from one GM, that Jamar Chase is a simple comp, but because of the LSU connection. But you see a lot of Jamar and Malik, and like I heard very specific terms, and I'm curious your perspective of it. I heard very violent stepper. Like you can hear. I heard that you can hear him run his routes and the way he's violent in that, and that's what makes him the explode. Like you hear explosiveness a lot with Malik. Can you?
So
Steve loves when players slam their feet into the ground. That's Steve's favorite running back. He had to do that.
So normally this is how, when you were talking, my mind was out there. You know what the term? He's a ground crawler. Ooh. And so how I would know that, I would love to look at his cleats after a game to see how much Air Force Ones, how much has he creased his shoes with the way he torques his feet and how much force he uses on the ground. Hence, because I was a ground crawler. And because I was such a ground crawler, I can only play, so stupid and it sounds, but the way my feet were too, I can only wear brand new cleats in a game because they were worn out. Basically, Air Force Ones. I don't really own a pair of Air Force Ones anymore because I crease the way I walk. The way I get in and out of the car, I get in and out of the car fluidly, but in the angle of which, whatever angle, that's the way I leap into the car, which, Steve, what does that have to do with football? It has to do with football. Wherever his feet, however his feet is not going to stop his explosiveness and his ability to attack the football or get out of a pickle for run after catch because the way he grounds his feet ground ground crawls, that he's just attacking everything. He's going forward with violence and force, which that 4.35 and some of the catches he's made, man, that's the thing that I think about.
What's the injury stance on
That
ground
is so
crawlers? What's the injury probability of ground crawlers?
So I'm not talking about the injury. I'm talking about the
That's
force.
a lot of force.
Yeah. No, I don't care about the injuries. I'm just saying why sometimes when people look at explosiveness, it's all different, right? And I expect Jamar Chase, I expect his cleats to be that way just because of how he is. Like he gets going, puts his foot in the ground, and violently gets back, and it's seamless. But it's so separating from the position and the amount of space from the receiver.
See,
man,
I'm so
they
glad
get
I asked
caught.
you that question. I learned something new. I've never heard ground crawler before today. That's a new phrase for me.
And I learned that eyebrows can talk.
We're all learning. We're all but to me, I wanted to get your insight there because it's so intriguing of how like people try to break down the receiver position and what they're seeing. And it's different flavors, right? Because you could talk about a receiver's feet probably being quiet as a positive too, right? And so it being a violent and heavier is not a negative, and it being quiet is not a negative. It's just a different style of how they run. And so I was very intrigued about your view because I'd heard that a couple times now with Malik, and it's like, can you contextualize what that means for what?
Well, so here's the contextual. Harrison is more quiet. He kills you softly, bro, and he'll smile in your face. But he'll cut you too, right? It's just a different way to go about it, right? They're skinning the cats, but at the end of the day, they're never gatherers. They're fishermen. They're going to go out there and be fruitful and feed their flock. And whoever you get, they're going to feed their flock, and you're going to be well fed.
I had dinner before LSU Pro Day with Malik Nabers' crew, his agent Rick Roberts, his uncle, his cousin Jordan Allen, who plays at LSU. And it was so fun kind of hearing their stories, particularly with his cousin Jordan. He was talking about like their brothers growing up. He talked about just how much trash they talk, and Malik in particular. And to me, every elite receiver, I got to have a prerequisite of what the trash talk is like. And so I heard some of the backstories, some that are PG, some are not, of what the trash talk is, what the competitive nature is. And I saw it up close. Like him and Brian Thomas had a competition of who would run the fastest 40. When Malik saw that he was 2/10 slower, he was angry. He ran a 4.3, which is great. As we're talking about how great that was, he was angry. He was talking about how the time wasn't right and how you need to look at this scout's time. And then I interviewed him after and I asked him about the time, and he started going off and bringing chips on his shoulder that I didn't even think were there. He was like, people thought I was slow. I'm like, who thought you were slow? And he was like, people said I was this. People said I was that. He was like, I'm here to tell you I'm the best receiver in the draft. And to me, I started getting bold. I'm like, I want my wide receiver one to talk like this. And so I'm curious, is it just me, or is there a certain energy, a certain level you have to be that type of alpha wide receiver one?
Man, it's just part of when you're out there on that island, or when you just, whatever makeup you have, it's not you're making up stuff. There are real things that have been said that affect you about you. And the people who are outside saying you shouldn't listen to it, hey, whatever you say, bounce off me, sticks to you, I'm rubber, you're glue. Like, that stuff is great. But when you think about it and you sit by yourself, sometimes, man, it's hard to shake it off. It's hard not to remember that these teams that asked me this question then had the opportunity on paper, it seems like, to draft me, and they didn't. They went with a different position because of that need. We think it was because of.
And it seems like, as you say that, Steve, some people use it as fuel. Some people let it beat them down. And then maybe there are still some that try to ignore it. But it seems like in this era, more and more, everybody's reading their social media. And so you're going to see it, and it's going to go one or two ways. It's going to make me better, which it seems like for Malik, he's using it and he's consuming it. Like, I think Michael Jordan used to consume it. It was like fuel for him. And some people, it affected them and it changed how they play because you're trying to prove people wrong every time you're on the field, you know?
Yeah, but I would say ultimately what the fans need to really understand is it was said. And unfortunately, because of the access we have, some of these players have held on to it. Hey, I have. And it's hard to some days, man, there are some days, man, I ignore it. And or some days I cannot even see it. But there are some other times, especially we do Thursday night, and I say something I don't like. I say something that someone doesn't like, and bro, the things that I've done 10 years ago in my career, one is 20 years ago. Some people will bring that up to this day. And sometimes, bro, it's like, damn, really?
But you know, that's a big part of this process right now. You know that, right? Like when these guys take these visits, there is usually a guy on each staff, whether it's a coach or whether it's a personnel guy, to push your buttons on purpose. We're sitting there and they're picking your film apart, and they want to see how you react to it. They want to see, like, I mean, this is the worst decision I've ever seen. Like, what were you thinking here? Like, that's a big part of this process of what you're talking about, Cam. How do those guys use that criticism? Or they try to do it in a variety of ways. And some of these guys walk out of their visits, they call their agent like, I hope they don't draft me, man.
I hate them.
That visit. I hate them, right? Oh my God, I hated that visit. And they're like, oh, and then the best part is when they do get drafted by that team.
Yeah.
And the team's like, I know one in specific, it was with a quarterback, and they just destroyed him. And then they picked him. And then he was the first guy to greet him at the facility and was like, hey, man, I know you don't like me right now. That's part of the process, man. And you got to, like, he had felt like he had to mend the relationship right away.
That's good.
But I'll give you one, and that's really good. I'll give you one, right? A grudge for a team that I held for a very long time, right? Is, man, the Chicago Bears brought me in for a visit. They brought me in. They brought in Corn Robinson and a kid from Texas A&M, Taylor. It was us three. And they had them at different times, but at one point they didn't know. Dick Duran had just got the head coaching job, just to let you know how my mind works and see if I'm picking on the Bears or I'm not. I'm just telling you my experience. The wide receivers coach had just got there, who I believe was assistant. And that assistant wide receivers coach came from Dallas Cowboys, who was an assistant, and I think he was the new wide receivers coach. Do you know who that wide receivers coach was? Todd Haley.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Hold on, though. I was supposed to meet with the special teams coach as well, but he wasn't there. So I think Todd was not the main wide receivers coach. He's an assistant. And so it was super awkward because Todd had me in there to meet with the wide receivers coach and the special team coach, the main guys, and they weren't even there. And I just remember going, wow, this team doesn't even look at me as a real wide receiver. They only see me as a special teams guy. Not knocking them, but I'm just saying the process. Now, my first couple of years, I think my second year in the league, they came to Carolina. I think second play of the game, I got caught, but second play of the game was a slant for 97 yards. Got caught on the three.
Steve.
But my whole time I was thinking about it. Fast forward, Todd Haley's offense coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals. They come in Carolina and play. He goes, you know, if we had a picture instead of David Terrell, I still probably have a job in Chicago, right? That's what he said. I looked at him and I said, I'm glad you finally realized what I realized, right?
Yeah, that day.
But here's the problem. Man, not every player gets that opportunity to hear that from that coach. Kudos to Todd, but kudos to that coach who made sure he level set it with that player to get things right on the right feet. I know there's a lot of teams who do that, have that player, man. Sometimes that pride gets in the way and they don't come back. They don't say, hey, man, I was just doing this, but, man, I really respect you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just saying that where, man, y'all got to be careful in saying these imaginary chip on their shoulder. Some of these ain't chips. Some of it is real life pain, bro. Or some of it's real life rejection, or some of it's real life feeling less than in this process. And I know that's not the intent, but that's the experience that some of these individuals.
There's no other job, like, and just kind of making this real abstract for people watching. There's no other job where you go out and to get to where you want to go, people pick apart who you are, every negative, before they give you your dream. Like, imagine if any of us are going about a job and the interview process.
And they go talk to your elementary school principal.
Back in middle school, you stole strawberry shortcake from the cafeteria. Are you a criminal? You know.
Hey, you know, because you give a release, and they can check your credit, and they go, hey, and also too. Right, which I got. Hey man, you forgot to pay your Pac Bell bill back in college for $64. Yes. They told. I said, damn, how you know that? They go, well, Steve, when you put your social security number, you didn't read. You released all information. We want to know. Not also are you a good person, but man, are you gonna screw up this money we gonna give you as well? Right.
Yeah.
Do you got any debts or liens or child support payments? No, I didn't. No, I don't. But it was like, but they brought up, man, what you gonna do with this $64 Pac Bell? And I was like, oh man, that was the bill I had when I had my own phone line when I lived at home.
Dude,
right?
Isn't that crazy? Imagine applying for a job and people going, well, Cam's got a long-term girlfriend that he's had since sophomore year of high school. We're pretty far from their hometown. I'm not sure how that's going to really work. Like, what? That is literally like a discussion that goes on in a room, which is fascinating.
Or even like, oh, this kid has never lived in a big city. How is he going to transition to a big city with all of the lights? Is it going to be too much? Is the cars, is the women, is everything that comes with the status too much for this dude without even giving you a chance to live it, to prove it, judging you based on what they feel like your character is, you know? That's but that's the process. That's the process. And like you said, whether you like it or not, you kind of enter it and people react different ways to it. And so I think a lot of times teams know the risk involved. And so they've got to do the homework. I'm not saying the process is bad. I get it. It maybe helps them figure out some character things that they want early. But I think a lot of times people get labeled before they get a chance to prove themselves. JP mentioned it. Guys 21 years old in their life. They are not finished in who they're going to be. And so one mistake or
I'm 45 and still figuring
I'm nowhere near it, guys. I'm nowhere near it. Nowhere near the completed JP project. I will say this, Cam, like the process that I mentioned, like how Marvin's doing it a little bit differently and Caleb's done it differently, the teams are now having to adjust to these players coming in. There's these are heavy evaluations that are going on about how we're dealing with kids coming in with money and kids coming in from NIL and how their mentality is and how they're different and how we have to be different. As we're talking about a league that doesn't adjust very well. Sometimes with some instances, this is a big part of where they're trying to find these adjustments. There's teams that think it's a positive. They're coming in with some money in their pocket. They've already had to manage the business side of things a little bit. They've had to manage some money already a little bit. That might be a positive. And then you're like, I don't know, this guy took a private jet to the combine. We're not used to this. This is a new thing. You know what I mean? So it is a whole new element that they're having to deal with these evaluations that are still just super in depth. But now the person is kind of in a little bit different spot, Steve. Steve's not paying his bill. Caleb Williams is $10 million in the bank. Like, it's a completely different process coming into the league right now. And teams are having to adjust on their evaluations of the human a little bit because of the other stuff that's coming along with football.
Well, man, this has been great. Can I ask you guys, promise me, we got to come back after the draft.
Yeah.
And then after we get some intel on how these teams settled in on their picks. And then let's talk about, because I think we'll get into it, but I think the draft doesn't start at number one. I think it starts at number two. The draft will begin at number 2. Who does the Washington Commanders take? Guess what? We will all find out in a couple of days. Cam Wolfe, James Palmer, Cam Wolfe. Appreciate it, man. I love you guys. Empty in the notebook. You guys are dry snitches to the dust, and I really appreciate it.
Gotta put that on my business card. Dry snitch.
Yeah.